When we try to figure out how a country of over 1 billion people actually functions, we usually get distracted by the loudest parts of the machine.
Oh, absolutely. The election rallies, the grand speeches, the breaking news alerts.
Right. But running a nation is, it's much less like a dramatic movie and far more like maintaining this incredibly complex, constantly updating piece of code.
Yeah, a massive operating system.
Exactly. There's the front-end user interface, which is the politics we see every day. And then there's the back-end architecture, the judicial rulings, the economic buffers, the administrative rules that, actually keep the system from crashing.
And that back end is exactly what we're looking at today. For you, the learner, whether you're prepping for the UPSC exams or just, need to know how the world works, mastering this is the true shortcut.
For sure. Today, we're opening up that back end. We've got a massive stack of source material from May 2026. We are distilling 23 crucial updates across polity, the Constitution, the economy, tech, and international relations.
It's a lot of ground to cover. And just to be clear, we aren't taking any political sides here.
Right. No sides at all.
Our mission is just to act as your personal current affairs mentors. We're going to impartially connect the dots and show you how today's headlines are, well, shaping tomorrow's governance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the operating system of India, you really have to start with its source code, which is the Constitution and the Judiciary.
Definitely.
And right now, the physical and, I guess, philosophical architecture of the Supreme Court is undergoing a massive shift. There's a brand new union cabinet bill to increase the Supreme Court's strength.
Yeah, from 34 to 38 judges. And that includes the Chief Justice.
Wait, 4 new judges? That's a pretty significant jump.
It is. And it's not just about, adding more chairs to a room. The Chief Justice has been very vocal about this structural bottleneck.
Right, because right now they mostly sit in benches of 2, right? Division benches.
Exactly. And when you only have 34 judges mostly working in pairs, you frequently end up with conflicting rulings on similar laws.
Huh?
So by expanding to 38, the court finally gains the mathematical bandwidth to establish a permanent constitution bench.
So like 5 or 9 judges sitting continuously.
Yes, to settle these monumental, complex legal questions once and for all without halting the daily flow of regular appeals.
And that bandwidth is, well, it's immediately relevant when you look at the massive 9-judge bench currently reviewing the 2018 Sabarumala verdict.
Oh, that hearing has been intense.
Yeah, the commentary from the bench this week was incredibly blunt. The Chief Justice severely criticized the original 2006 public interest litigation, the PIL filed by the Indian Young Lawyers Association.
He really went after their locus standi.
Right, their legal standing to even bring the case. He literally stated the PIL should have been thrown outright in the dustbin.
Which is a huge statement. The whole mechanism of the PIL is undergoing this intense ideological audit right now.
Because originally, back in the 80s, the PIL was engineered to bypass strict locus standi, right? So activists could represent bonded laborers or under trials who literally couldn't access the courts themselves.
Exactly. But the bench is arguing that the tool has been, well, hijacked. Justice Nagarethna coined a really sharp phrase during the hearing. She said PILs have morphed into private, publicity, paisa, and political interest litigation.
Wow, that is sharp.
Yeah. The court is asking this fundamental philosophical question. How can a juristic body, an association of lawyers, claim that its personal freedom of conscience under Article 25 is being violated?
Because an association doesn't have a soul or a personal religious belief.
Right.
But wait, I have to push back on this strict interpretation of standing. I mean, if the Supreme Court starts throwing out PILs just because the petitioner isn't the direct victim, aren't we risking shutting the door on genuine public grievances just to clear the docket?
That is the exact tension. And it's a fair question. The court is trying to recalibrate the valve, essentially. They aren't killing the PL, they just want to stop proxy litigants from weaponizing it.
Okay, so preventing political battles from being disguised as religious grievances.
Precisely. And you see this defense of the individual continuing in how the bench addressed interfaith marriage. They vehemently question how an interfaith marriage could strip a Parsi woman of her freedom of conscience.
Right. They called Article 25 a right by birth. It's inherent, completely independent of the conditional rules of a religious institution or a marriage contract.
Exactly.
And that focus on the individual over the institution, it extends directly to bodily autonomy, too. We just saw a landmark ruling on Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty.
Yes, the Ames case.
Right. The Supreme Court dropped contempt proceedings against Ames for terminating a 15-year-old's pregnancy at 30 weeks.
Which is well past the standard statutory time limits.
Yeah, the medical board was initially terrified of the legal liabilities of a late-term termination. The infant actually survived the procedure and is in the NICU.
But the court bypassed those standard limits entirely. They declared that forcing a minor to carry an unwanted pregnancy fundamentally violates her reproductive autonomy.
Because the timeline is the tragic mechanism here.
It really is. By the time a family discovers a minor's pregnancy, overcomes the social shock, and navigates the sluggish legal and medical approvals, they frequently hit that 7-month mark.
Right. And at that point, the rigid wording of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act conflicts with the reality of a traumatized child.
Exactly. The court established that when statutory law creates a crisis, Article 21's guarantee of dignity has to override it. The alternative is driving vulnerable minors to unqualified, dangerous practitioners.
Wow. So the Constitution is heavily mediating the relationship between the citizen and the state. But it also has to manage the friction between the states and the center.
And that friction is overheating right now. Seriously. The Trinamool, Congress-led West Bengal government is locked in multiple legal battles. They're filing original suits in the Supreme Court alleging federal overreach.
And they've actively withdrawn general consent for CBI probes.
Okay, can we break down the mechanics of that withdrawal? What does that actually mean?
Sure. Under the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, the CBI requires the host state's consent to operate within its borders.
Right.
Usually, states just grant a blanket general consent for efficiency,
Huh.
but by withdrawing it, West Bengal is forcing the CBI to seek permission for every single investigation.
Which essentially paralyzes central probes on state turf.
Exactly. Add to that the state police filing FIRs against Central Enforcement Directorate officials, and you have a severe stress test of India's federal structure.
Because the states feel the central machinery is being used politically, so they're using administrative red tape as a shield.
And that moves us from how laws are interpreted in court to how political power is actually mapped and acquired. Let's talk about the recent Assam Assembly elections, because that is a perfect case study.
Yeah, the NDA crossed the 100-seat mark there.
But the sources show the victory wasn't just about voter sentiment. It was about the architecture of the electoral map itself, following the 2023 delimitation exercise.
Right. Delimitation is the process of redrawing constituency boundaries to reflect population changes.
But how you draw those lines dictates the concentration of voting blocks.
Exactly. In Assam, the map was significantly overhauled. In central and lower Assam, the total number of assembly seats dropped from 49 to 44.
Down to 44. So the practical effect of this was that minority populations, which were previously spread out enough to influence multiple distinct seats.
They were clubbed together into fewer, more concentrated constituencies.
Right. So by packing those demographics tightly together, their overall influence across the state is mathematically diluted. It's literally redrawing the borders of the chessboard while the game is actively being played.
That's a great way to put it.
But what happens when a piece on that chessboard changes sides entirely? In Punjab, 6 AAP members of parliament just defected to the BJP.
Yeah, and in response, Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann went straight to the president demanding a constitutional amendment for a right to recall.
Because the anti-defection law is clearly failing to deter politicians from jumping ship.
Right. They often bypass the rules by merging factions or just resigning and rerunning. The right to recall proposes giving voters a direct lever to remove an elected representative midterm.
So instead of waiting for the 5-year cycle to end, they can pull them out if they defect or grossly underperform.
That's the idea.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, I have to ask, is this practically feasible? A right to recall in a democracy of India's immense scale.
It's a massive logistical question.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like it would plunge the Election Commission into a perpetual, never-ending cycle of localized elections driven by whoever has the funds to trigger a recall petition. Is this just political theater to punish defectors?
It's almost certainly political signaling, but it does highlight a genuine democratic design flaw. It's the classic trade-off between absolute accountability and practical stability.
Right. If representatives are constantly fighting recall campaigns, governance halts.
But if they face no consequences for abandoning their mandate for 5 years, representation is just an illusion.
Wow. And speaking of representation and who holds authority, there was a really fascinating administrative note from the Allahabad High Court.
Oh, about the honorifics.
Yes, they ruled that honorifics like honorable or Mr. belong exclusively to constitutional functionaries, ministers, judges, MPs.
Right, and explicitly not to civil servants, no matter how high-ranking they are.
It's such a deliberate dismantling of a colonial hangover. The court is enforcing the distinction between sovereign power, which flows from the electorate, and administrative duty, which is assigned via an exam.
A bureaucrat is a mechanism of the state, not a ruler of it.
Exactly. And we desperately need those mechanisms to be competent, because when administrative duty fails, the financial damage is staggering.
You're thinking of the IFMS fraud.
Yes. The 50 crore rupee Treasury scam that just came to light in Jharkhand, fraudsters siphoned massive amounts of public money, and this is the crazy part, they didn't even use sophisticated hacking.
No, the vulnerability was entirely administrative. Fraudsters manipulated the state's integrated financial management system, the IFMS and the Kuber portal, to withdraw funds in the names of dead or retired employees.
Okay, but how does 50 crore disappear over years without a single alarm bell ringing in the finance department?
Because of an over-reliance on a single point of failure, the Drawing and Dispersing Officer, or DDO, the Treasury receives hundreds of bills daily. Instead of verifying the individual pay accounts on the back end, the staff are conditioned to just look at the digital summary sheet and blindly trust the DDO's electronic certification.
Wow. So the digitization didn't eliminate human error, it just digitized the blind spot.
Exactly. The speed of the tech outpaced the auditing infrastructure.
And that exact friction technology outpacing administrative realities just forced the UP government to step back from their mandatory prepaid smart electricity meters.
Right, there were widespread protests.
Because the concept makes sense on paper. You pay up front, the meter tracks your usage, no bad debts. But in practice, consumers faced automated disconnections the second their balance hit zero during severe heat waves.
Paired with erratic billing algorithms, the State Regulatory Commission actually had to step in because the power companies couldn't handle the sudden surge in reconnections.
Right, you can't implement an automated punitive system without an equally efficient grievance redressal system.
You really can't.
Yet contrast that with Delhi police, who were doubling down on automation. They're launching a massive AI push across 100 police stations.
Yeah, the senior DCPs are implementing predictive policing, facial recognition, and this new database they're calling Crime Kundali.
Crime Kundali. They want to shift from reacting to crimes to predicting them.
They're feeding historical arrest data from the crime and criminal tracking network and systems into machine learning algorithms to map high-risk zones.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a massive paradox. Technology is a double-edged sword. It can predict a crime in Delhi, but blindly approve a ghost salary in Jharkhand.
It's all about how the data is handled.
Right. And our predictive policing and facial recognition massive privacy risks? I mean, if the historical data fed into these crime kundalis is based on decades of flawed demographic targeted arrests, won't it disproportionately target specific demographics?
That is the immense risk of an automated bias loop. The AI highlights a neighborhood because of past data. Police patrol it more heavily. They make more arrests because they are present.
Which feeds right back into the AI, validating the initial prediction.
Exactly. Without independent auditing, predictive policing just creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Man. And funding all this, whether it's fixing systemic fraud or buying AI tech, relies on the stability of the economy, especially when facing external shocks.
Which brings us to the Union Cabinet's approval of ECLGS 5.0.
Right, the 2.55 lakh crore rupee emergency credit line guarantee scheme.
This specific iteration is targeted heavily at helping MSMEs and airlines buffer against distress caused by the ongoing conflict in West Asia.
Because that conflict is causing violent spikes in global freight and fuel costs. So this scheme is a credit guarantee. It tells the banks, keep lending to these struggling small businesses, the government will absorb the risk of default.
Exactly. It keeps the working capital flowing.
So the economy is like a vehicle. The ECLGS is the shock absorber, but the steering wheel is the inflation target.
That's a good analogy. And the RBI and the government have retained the flexible 4% inflation targeting framework with a 2 to 6% ban through 2031.
Okay, but pushback time. By strictly retaining the inflation target during a global crisis, which keeps interest rates high, aren't we sacrificing rapid economic growth just to keep prices artificially stable?
It's a debate, for sure. But the RBI's stance is that inflation is essentially a highly regressive tax on the poor. Unanchored inflation destroys the purchasing power of vulnerable citizens far faster than a slowed economy does.
I see.
And there was a slightly humorous but very significant moment where RBI Deputy Governor Poonam Gupta, pointed out that the IMF's growth forecasts for India have consistently been lower than the actual outcomes.
Basically saying the RBI's forecasting is more accurate than Washington's.
Politely, yes.
I love that. And because domestic credit is relatively tight, the government has to look outward for capital, which explains the new standard operating procedure for foreign direct investment.
The new FDI SOP is aggressive. It caps approval at 12 weeks, makes the process fully digital, and mandates a dedicated FDI cell in each ministry.
To eliminate bureaucratic duplication.
Mm.
And the mechanism here is silence is consent. Right? If a ministry fails to respond within the 12 weeks, their silence is treated as a no objection.
It forces the bureaucracy to either find a legitimate security concern immediately or get out of the way.
We're also seeing urgent interventions in agriculture to manage food inflation. The government just approved over 5,600 crore rupees for the cotton productivity mission.
And they hiked the fair and remunerative price for sugarcane.
Quick hits there, but super important.
Yeah.
And they're also recovering wealth hidden abroad. A court just authorized the confiscation of fugitive arms consultant Sanjay Bhandari's UK assets under the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act.
Which really shows the extraterritorial reach of Indian economic law is maturing.
Definitely. But all these economic shocks, they're driven by international events. Which brings us to our final frontier: global conflict, environmental law, and the race for secure technology.
Starting with the immediate security threats in West Asia.
Yeah, impartial reporting here from the sources. There was a drone strike in Fujairah in the UAE, which originated from Iran. 3 Indian nationals were injured. PM Modi strongly condemned the targeting of civilians.
And the geopolitical maneuvering at the UN is intense right now. The U.S. and Bahrain are seeking a Chapter 7 resolution regarding the Strait of Hormuz.
A Chapter 7 resolution legally authorizes member states to use military and non-military action to restore peace, right?
Yes, it's the most potent tool the UN has, but they are treading very carefully. Iran's accelerating nuclear program looms over everything, and previous attempts to secure the strait have been vetoed by Russia and China.
Because they view U.S. naval expansion as a larger threat. It is a massive geopolitical knot. And the very definition of what constitutes a war crime in these zones is expanding.
Yes, we're seeing a huge debate over ecocide.
Right. Lebanon has officially accused Israel of committing ecocide during its invasion. And there is a growing international push to make ecocide an enforceable international crime under the Rome Statute of the ICC.
Proponents argue that systemic environmental destruction is a calculated weapon of war, meant to render land uninhabitable. They want to hold military commanders personally liable.
Okay, but again, is ecocide even a viable legal concept to enforce during a hot war? I mean, when human survival against rocket fire is the immediate focus, isn't the threat of an ICC tribunal years away just academic idealism? Who's arresting a general for burning a forest when cities are leveling?
Direct enforcement during hostilities is nearly impossible, yeah. But the mechanism is the chilling effect. By codifying it, you alter the legal calculus of military lawyers advising those commanders, creating a historical record that restricts their travel globally for life.
That makes sense. And speaking of the environment, things are shifting domestically too. New CPCB data shows a radical shift in India's pollution dynamics.
It's really surprising data.
Yeah, traditional pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide are actually declining. But ozone is rapidly emerging as the new major threat.
Driven by climate change and prolonged heat waves, baking volatile compounds into ground-level ozone.
Which means we are essentially playing 3D chess. We're managing physical drone strikes and trying to catch invisible ozone pollution, all while needing unprecedented technological leaps.
Which brings us to hardware sovereignty and the India Semiconductor mission.
Right. The cabinet just approved 2 new semiconductor plants worth over 3,000 crore rupees.
Trying to ensure we aren't reliant on fractured global supply chains.
And simultaneously, a massive leap in nuclear tech. A U.S. firm, CleanCore, secured a historic Department of Energy license to sell next-gen nuclear technology to India.
Their proprietary fuel, ANEL, they recently surpassed 60 gigawatt days per metric ton of uranium burnup in the Advanced Test Reactor.
Which is a huge milestone. It basically means wringing the nuclear sponge bone dry, extracting vastly more energy out of the exact same amount of uranium, reducing waste.
It's a phenomenal leap. But interestingly, while nuclear hardware advances, global regulatory anxiety is entirely focused on digital technology.
AI regulation.
Yes. Globally, tech giants like Microsoft, Google, and xAI agreed to share their AI models with the U.S. government, specifically KII, prior to public release.
To test for security risks. They're treating AI like highly enriched uranium.
Exactly. And in India, SEBI issued a stark advisory cautioning market players about the risks of using advanced, unvetted AI tools, like the new Mythos model for algorithmic trading and vulnerability detection.
Wow. Okay, look at the sheer scale of the mechanics we've mapped out today. We started with the Supreme Court physically expanding to defend reproductive autonomy, to redrawing electoral maps in Assam. We saw digital treasury frauds in Jharkhand, economic buffers like ECLGS, and the cutting edge of AI and nuclear tech.
It really is the holistic machinery of governance.
It is. Mastering these intersections is the true shortcut to being well-informed. But before we wrap, you had a final provocative thought based on those AI advisories.
I do. Think about KSI and SEBI scrutinizing AI pre-release. If advanced AI models are now being treated with the same government caution as nuclear materials, will the future geopolitical divide mirror the Cold War?
Oh, wow.
Will the world split not between the nuclear-armed and the disarmed, but between the AI-armed states who control the foundational code and the AI-dependent states forced to just rent it?
That is the ultimate question of sovereignty. Are you writing the code, or are you just existing inside it? Something for you all to mull over. Keep digging into the mechanics, keep questioning the systems, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.